With the review of the KUSMA free trade deal fast approaching, the U.S. Trade Office is naming a list of old and new grievances with Canada. These are the Canadian trade barriers the U.S. identified in its annual report yesterday. Some are long-standing issues, like supply management, but a number of items appear to be new to the list, like pharmaceuticals, buy Canadian rules, and imports made with forced labor. This Friday also marks 1 year since Trump put tariffs on Canadian vehicles, and today there's a potential sign of just how much the sector is changing. According to a report by Bloomberg, Stellantis is in talks to make Chinese electric vehicles at its idle plant in Brampton, Ontario, where thousands of workers have been laid off. Joining me now, Lana Payne is the national president of Unifor. Welcome to the show. I know you've seen this Bloomberg report about Stellantis discussing making Chinese EVs in Brampton. What do you know about where Stellantis is at on this?
Well, we've had any number of discussions with the company, obviously, around their commitment to Brampton and to our members. We know that they are looking at any number of options here, and we have been reminding them that the option is the one that we negotiated in 2023. And that is to have and build a Jeep Compass in that facility, employing 3,000 workers on 3 shifts. The reality is, at this moment, obviously options are being looked at by the company. But what I would say is what we know of China and their record around the world, their track record around the world is, it's not that they invest in the supply chain. It's not that they invest in manufacturing. They have an overcapacity in their own country. Generally, what happens is the cars get built in China. They get taken apart into a couple of parts, and those parts get moved to facilities around the world, and then they get put together. It's called a knockdown kit, and it's not manufacturing. It's not anything like we've seen in this country, and the number of people that would be employed in such a scenario would be virtually hundreds versus thousands.
So even if it would put some of your workers back to work in Brampton, and I guess some people would see that as a positive, you're against this idea because of, your record of speaking against, Ottawa easing the tariffs on Chinese EVs because of the risk of China getting a foothold in Canada's market. So yes, this would maybe put workers back to work or some workers back to work, but it's not something that you see as a positive development.
The problem here is we have a commitment, and we expect the company to live up to that commitment, and that means to be building cars in Brampton. And that is the discussion that we need to be having. That's the discussion the government needs to be having with Stellantis, and that's the one that we're going to continue to have, because thousands of workers are depending on that plant in the plant, and thousands of workers in the supply chain who've been displaced as a result of the plant being idled this past year or so. So that's what we're going to keep fighting for, because that's what the workers deserve there.
So speaking of that commitment, Industry Minister Mélanie Joly has said that Ottawa would serve Stellantis with a notice of default over those hundreds of millions of dollars in incentives that Stellantis received, because obviously they moved the Jeep Compass production to the U.S., and that seems to go against the agreement to get those incentives. So do you have any sense of where that fight with Stellantis is right now?
Well, the reality is there is a very big role that the government can play right now. We are still facing punishing tariffs from the United States on cars that we build in Canada that are exported to the U.S. The reality is we are halfway through creating what needs to be a robust auto policy, which still needs to be flushed out in very important areas. That work needs to happen. And we have to find a way through that policy, and I believe that there is a way, to create the conditions where those companies that actually build in Canada, like Stellantis, like Ford Motor Company, like General Motors, like Honda, like Toyota, that they get preferential treatment because they actually are manufacturing and building and creating good jobs here in this country, versus those that import to Canada, like China, with no footprint, with no investment in the supply chain in the parts sector of the auto industry, and basically getting free access to our market. Those days need to be gone, and we need to reward those people who are building and creating jobs in Canada. And our auto policy in this country has to absolutely do that. Otherwise, everything is at risk.
Although it does sound like there have been some rewards for that in terms of tweaks that Mélanie Joly, the industry minister, has made to reward companies for investing, but those companies aren't the big three. So are you saying that the government isn't going far enough in terms of its incentives when instead what seems to be happening is more investment from, let's say, Honda and Toyota rather than the big three?
Well, I mean, the big three are investing in Canada too. The reality is, we just had a third shift hired in Windsor by Stellantis. General Motors has invested in Ottawa, in Oshawa, and in the next generation pickup truck there. And Ford Motor Company is about to be building Super Duties in Oakville. So to say that only Honda and Toyota are investing in Canada would not be true. It's not accurate.
Okay, I take your point. I guess it just sounds like so far the incentives have worked towards those car companies' favor. But I want to ask you about the Buy Canadian aspect of what you're also looking for, wanting the government and the country to increase that Buy Canadian policy. But it is listed as an irritant in terms of the latest USTR list of irritants, things that they're annoyed at Canada about. And I'm just wondering if we actually go further on Buy Canadian, could that not complicate trade talks and the CUSMA review?
I would say what the Canadian government did on the China deal in terms of EVs is probably a bigger problem for us at the CUSMA table than us talking about how we can build vehicles together with the United States. So it's not just about Buy Canadian. It is about what we do in the North American auto region. It is so integrated that any vehicle that we would build in Canada would have U.S. components in it, upwards of 60% in any case. So this is the reality of the auto industry. And I believe in terms of a CUSMA discussion, there is a way to talk about how do we continue to build together, increase the manufacturing footprint together, while also looking at this bigger problem that the U.S. has and that Canada has, and that is a lot of imports coming into the North America from companies and countries that have absolutely no manufacturing footprint. Let's solve that problem first.
But what leverage do we have if you have a president who says and has been very explicit about he does not want cars made in Canada. Parts perhaps, but not cars. And I'm just wondering what leverage we have at the CUSMA table or at any table right now when that's the explicit stated purpose from the president.
I mean, the president has said a lot of things, and he will continue to say a lot of things. Our job as the Canadian government and as Canadians is to support the industries that we have here and to use leverage that we have in different places to make sure that we don't just export the things that the U.S. needs, whether it's aluminum, whether it's energy, but that we also expect the U.S. to, have access we have access to their market so that we get to build things here in Canada as well. It is a two-way street. And I would say to you, that is how we need to be propositional at that trade table. We have leverage. We need to use it.
Have to leave it there. Thank you very much for your time today. Lana Payne is the national president of Unifor.